Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. O.P. Verma from Himachal Pradesh University, Shimla. Today we are going to talk on module Change Stabilization from paper Organizational Change and Development. After studying this module, you will be able to understand meaning of change stabilization, effectiveness of the change stabilization, applying the Kurt-Lewin model of change in the context of change stabilization, disengagement of the change agent-client relationship, prerequisites for the success of OD effort. Let's start with the introduction. Organization change is in itself a complex process. Now, why it is called a complex process? The answer lies in the very nature of the process and the components involved. Human behavior, which is never predictable, makes this process complex by nature. Therefore, nobody can design commonly shared technique of change that can be made applicable on every organization. For the simple reason that organization difference in their respective work culture, structure, design, motivation, and leadership style, technology, processes, and people. Therefore, any intended change must be in contrast with the dynamic and complex nature of the organization. The changes that takes place have small impact on the organization, but are continuous in nature. An organization can be seen in a state of fix, but its systems are continuously in a state of fix, but its subsystems are continuously in a state of adapting to change. While there are some forces external to the organization, there are reasons internal to the organization which drives the change. Say, if the management feels that it would harm the interest of the organization to remain rigid while confronting the technological advancement, this is definitely going to make a substantial loss to the organization. On the other side, if we see inside the organization, there is a change in the cultural prospects. Now the employees are no longer satisfied with simply holding a specified position in the organization. Rather, it wants to utilize its full potential and seek opportunities for growth and development. The major reason for the organization to be in continuous stage is the forces, internal as well as external, which do not let the organization rest in peace and keep it moving. It is because of this nature, organizational development techniques are also in a continuing process as and when the change motive is achieved. A completely new standard arises. As a result of this implication, the change agent facilitating the change process is confronted with two basic things to be served. First, stability of the organizational development effort, or in simple words, the required change after the end of client change agent relationship. Second, the ability of the client system to deal with the maintenance of the change. It depends on the ability of the change agent to properly plan, implement, and stabilize the change where the organization fits comfortable with the prevailing environment. Here, an attempt will be made to discuss the indicators of monitoring as well as stabilizing the change effort. Also, it will try to give a brief implication of how to disengage the relationship of change agent and management. Meaning of change stabilization. Change stabilization is composed of two words, change plus stabilization. Stabilizing means freezing, or in other words, it means limiting the fluctuations. It is a kind of situation where the desired change, which is obtained by a series of action, is obtained, and to further continue with this desired state, a proper installation of stabilization is required so that the organization does not return to the status quo. Let's consider the stabilization from a very simple example. A person who has a habit of smoking, if measures have been taken to eliminate this habit of smoking, and during the transition period of smoking to non-smoking, an individual may desire to discontinue the habit of smoking for a short span. But if the individual starts smoking after 2 months, then it simply conveys that the change initiative objectives have not been achieved. In the same manner, this might also happen in an organization. When the change agent leaves the organization after the implementation of the change, this refers to a phenomena where the change agent uses the organizational interventions to develop a new behavior supportive of change, but after a certain time span, the same returns to its previous behavior. The reason can be a rigid work environment, non-participative climate prevailing in the organization, permanent acceptance by the client system, and so forth. This deterioration of change may occur if the implanted change is not stabilized into the organizational system, and therefore the organizational behavior slips back to the previous situation. Effectiveness of the change stabilization. The effectiveness of the change stabilization calls for ensuring the performance of the change that has been implanted. There are several facilitating factors that can be applied to facilitate the stabilization process. Some of them are discussed below. Provide a suitable environment. Management must ensure to make arrangements in organization system which is in tune with the efforts of the change agent. Communication of merits. The system should convey the benefits that can be obtained of the change effort are stabilized. A proper communication of the benefits that the change had brought needs to be conveyed to those elements who are implementing the actual change. Internalization of change. For achieving early stabilization of the change, it must be institutionalized in the sense that its early acceptance and adoption makes the change effort a routine part of the organizational activity. Demonstrate the effectiveness. The favorable results which are obtained by the organizational development programs in one division or unit must be demonstrated to their divisions or units where there is a need of change. Continuous assessment. The change must make sure that the change effort is continuously assessed. This activity would also keep a check on the degradation of the change effort over time and with the same effort keep on improving. Reference to the LEWIN model of organizational change. LEWIN three-step model of organizational change provides a basis for the need and significance of stabilization of the change. The model itself conveys that it tries to make equilibrium between the forces driving the change as well as the forces which are resisting the change. The third step of the model, that is the rephrasing stage, focuses on the importance of stabilizing change in the organization. Rephrasing at individual level. Individual participation and cooperative attitude helps in determining their positive involvement in the change initiative. Their continued involvement and commitment helps the change agent in driving the desired results. This can be achieved by starting open learning programs, providing educational and training facilities for the work group, and properly framed induction and orientation program for the newcomers. Rephrasing at system level. For altering the system to make it more adaptive and in accordance with the change agent needs to redirect the system by introducing new development plans, new compensation system, new appraisal techniques for outcomes, etc., in order to get in tune and make contrast with the organization change stabilization. Thus, stabilization is a phase which tries to assess the success of the planned change and its performance in accordance with what the situation demands. Reaching the point of disengagement of the change agent client relationship. If the consultant is in the business of enhancing the client's system abilities in problem solving and renewal, then the consultant is mainly trying to internalize the necessary skills and insight in the client system rather than creating a long dependency relationship. An issue of landing a dependency on the client and change agent relationship will make the organization less competent. Both the parties must strive to gradually reduce the dependency on the external consultancy and use an organizational development technique with more maturity. Further, if the consultant senses that his or her assistance is not required, in that case it must be reduced gradually, and the client should be encouraged to use its professional resources on their own. The relationship a change agent and a client who is demanding the change shares cannot remain in a continuing stage. If in any case this happens, it simply conveys that organization climate is not strengthened to hold the implemented change for long. The other imperative it draws is that the strategy for implanting the change effort does not hold well with the objectives for which whole change process is initiated. After the change agent or the consultant who have implemented the change are sure that the developments of the implanted change needs no support from consultancy side. It arrives the time that the change agent slowly or gradually decreases its control over the system and let the system absorb the change independently. When the management of the organization chose to go for outside consultancy, that means they are remaining dependent for support for a short period of time. As and when the consultant feels that the organizational development program has been stabilized, the need for the expert advice decreases. This is a point where consultant feels saturated with providing a fragile environment for the management or the client system itself feels confident enough to handle and continue with the change on their own. There are various organizational development interventions which follows a certain kind of implications with regard to its implementation. Sometimes management is not able to assess and follow these developmental programs implications correctly. So they tend to consult an external help for the better implementation of the change program. The consultant, after making the entire system for the successful implementation of the change effort, leave the responsibility with the management to handle the situation on their own. But before doing the same, the change agent must ensure that the client system has a self-renewal capacity and is completely capable of handling the disengagement or discontinuous of relationship. Development of self-renewal capacity. In very simple terms, self-renewal capacity refers to the capacity of the organization or the client organization system to initiate and implement the change programs without the support of any outside help. The basic objective behind the development of consultant-client relationship is that the consultant during the tenure improvise the organization on many fronts related to the change so that where the consultant take a leave or disengage them, the client is capable enough to deal with further environmental changes and diverse its strategy accordingly. Encourage the ability to innovate and problem solving are the prime focus of the expert. Usually, the mechanism for building the self renewal system is to develop the internal change agent in the organization to handle the established system when the same is left by the change agent. These internal change agent groups continue the task with collecting new data, then diagnosis and analyzing the collected data and evaluating the further need to implement the strategies or programs for change. Disengagement of the relationship with the client system. The responsibility to develop a self-renewal capacity within the organization lies on the change agent. A change agent during his tenure in the organization makes every possible effort to diverse a strategy to maintain equilibrium with the change and at the same time puts its efforts to internally develop a self-renewal system, substituting and decreasing the need for change agent. It is important that the change agent develop a substituting system internally so as to avoid the shock for the organization when the change agent leaves. If the change agent successfully incorporates an internal renewal system, then in that case, the termination of the change agent and client relationship would prove to be a smooth transition. But if the organization is overly dependent on the change agent itself, then in that case, it is going to be a difficult task to handle the shock. Now, how can we decide that the correct time has arrived that for the discontinuance of the relationship between the client system and the change agent? The consultant, before starting the organizational development programs, together with the client, benchmark their requirements. Both the parties consider disengagement when the set benchmarks evaluating the change have been attained. Also, when the change agent is satisfied with the fact that the organization, if left alone, is capable enough with resources to handle the change itself, then the consultant feels free to leave the organization alone. But the client can also take the initiative of discontinuance if he feels that the whole change program is not benefiting in driving any enhanced effectiveness to the organization. Thus, the entire process of discontinuance of relationship between the change agent and the client system can be characterized as follows. Relatively reduced involvement in the decision-making mechanism of the organization by the change agent. Stake in the involvement does not end completely but comes to comparatively low percentage than the previous state. If the client further desires to continue working with the change agent, their partnership is always welcome. Further, continue formal or informal contracts are always possible for implementing an organizational change effort. Prerequisites for the success of organizational development effort. Some possible prerequisites are identified by the experts in the field of implementing organizational change. They are as follows. The organization that is desired to implement the change must be in pressure to improve so that they themselves search for the solutions. Top officials take interventions or they allow an expert to implement the organization development interventions by reassessing the past as well as the future prevailing conditions. All the operating levels of the organization take a participative and collaborative effort in the direction of bringing the change by collecting the data and analyzing the concerned problem. To ensure a collaborative effort in the direction of developing the ideas, the members at all levels of the organization take effort by giving their due commitment. More effort is put to innovate rather than traveling on the previous line of doing things. Positive reinforcement is ensured so as to receive positive outcomes. Let's summarize what we have learned in this module. The prospects of organizational development have grown with the expansion of the organizations. Many techniques have been developed in this particular field. Due to this growth, there is a wide range of differences among different organizational development practitioners regarding the importance and implementation of organizational development technique. While there was a time when these organizational development interventions emphasize to focus upon behavioral aspects of the change, but now the time has come that the practitioners are now expanding their scope of development by including structural as well as technical interventions. Organizational development involves system-wide application of behavioral science interventions with the objective to enhance organizational effectiveness in the long term. The management must try to design the interventions techniques in such a manner so that there is integration between the individual aspiration for growth and development with the organizational goals. The manager's attitude and their managerial style must have the capability to effectively communicate and motivate the workforce. The management must design the organizational development strategies to change the attitude, perception, beliefs, learning, objectives, and structures of organization in such a way to make them more anticipative and adaptive. The organizational development represents a change in the organizational system as well as in the behavioral pattern to make it in line with the needs of the environmental, that is external and internal constraints. It is because of this fluctuating business environment, organizational development practitioners must understand the advantages and disadvantages of different strategies and interventions for organizational change. Therefore, to deal with the problem of future shock, organization development methodology helps organization and its workforce to work collectively and achieve the desired objectives. Thank you.